Today, I have with me Mathew Kraft from Brown University. Matt is an assistant professor of education and economics, and he's been looking at coaching for a number of years now. And he recently published an article in Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis that looked at a particular model of coaching and its efficacy. But in doing that work, he did a broader synthesis with David Blazer and Dylan Hogan of different forms of instructional coaching and their effects on different teacher and student outcomes. And they've just released a working paper. So let me start off today, Matt, by asking you, what is coaching and how's it supposed to work to build educator capacity?
Right. My work with David and others on specific coaching programs really led me to want to explore more about what we know as a field in terms of the efficacy of coaching as a professional development model. And so, what I came to learn as I read about the kind of very wide range of programs that exist is that coaching takes a lot of different forms, but at its core, I think that there are probably 5 tenets that help to distinguish coaching from other forms of PD that may be related. The first is that it's individualized, that it is a process by which an individual teacher is receiving specific support that's tailored to their own needs. The second is that it's intensive, that it is a process that involves real investment in time, both on the part of the teacher and the expert who's serving in the capacity of the coach. The third is that it's sustained, that it's not a one-off visit by an outside expert, but it is a continuous cycle of observations and feedback. The fourth is that it's context specific, and this speaks to the importance of the observations taking place in the teacher's classroom while they are engaged with the students that they serve, and taking into account the teacher's actual challenges, both from the school-wide perspective as well as with individual students. And last and fifth is that it's focused, that coaching models typically, instead of talking about instruction writ large, say we're going to focus on one particular aspect and really drill down in that area. And we may then pivot to a next one once we feel like you've made solid progress in that focus area. But instead of kind of being very wide in terms of the focus, they help teachers to develop specific skill areas.
So one thing that's really interesting about the list that you provided, and a piece that I think is implicit in what you in the list, is that actual practice is the substance of the conversation, and both parties, the coach and the learner, are engaged in either doing or watching the same thing and then having a discussion around that, as opposed to talking about the things that I do as a teacher, for example.
Right. And, I think you could choose to add a 6th characteristic, which speaks to this point, that coaching is kind of proactive on the part of teachers. Instead of simply receiving expertise or information or curriculum support materials in a professional development setting, they are asked to kind of enact their own process of improvement and reflection and engaging in dialogue and discourse with the coach. And so, therein lies also a challenge in that you really need buy-in from both the teacher and the coach to kind of mutually engage in this process of professional improvement.
And one thing that really struck me as I was reading your work was the point that you made about coaching being connected to other forms of professional development. So it's not a discrete activity, but it's bundled with other types of professional learning opportunities. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this was something that I think was both a surprise for me and my co-authors when we conducted this review of the causal literature on teacher coaching. You know, the programs that I have studied more closely have been primarily coaching programs that it's the act of the observation and feedback that is the primary focus of the professional development. But across the field, what we found was that it was more common that coaching was a feature of a larger package of professional development supports that complemented, say, a initial summer workshop to deepen teachers' content knowledge or introduce a new pedagogical practice. The common things that we saw that were bundled with coaching were things like these group training and workshops, particular curriculum materials that were kind of rolled out and then supported as they were implemented with coaching, and often video libraries of teachers that were kind of demonstration examples of different moves or pedagogical practices that teachers could access to kind of help learn about the ways in which these things are implemented in classrooms.
So there's lots of different kinds of ways of summarizing what the research says about a particular topic area, and you took a particular approach, which is a meta-analysis. And you also mentioned earlier that you focused at least primarily on causal studies. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the process that you used before you describe what you found.
Great. So, you know, our motivation was really to try to answer some core questions about what we know in terms of the causal impact of teacher coaching programs on two primary outcomes: on teachers' instruction in the classroom and on students' achievement on standardized assessments. And in order to do that, one can pick a program and evaluate it, and ideally do that in a way that is a randomized control trial, an experiment where you randomly assign half of the teachers or half of the participating schools to receive that coaching model and others to be the control group and kind of have business as usual. And what we did is we said, well, there's a growing number of these studies in recent years. What can we learn about coaching as a general classification of professional development by pooling the information across the existing studies? And so in reviewing the literature and speaking to experts in the field, we identified 37 studies that we determined met rigorous empirical research design expectations around being able to identify causal effects.
So, of the 37 studies that met your inclusion rules, do you want to talk a little bit about the subject areas of those 37?
Right. So, part of the legacy of some of the earlier federal investments from No Child Left Behind and other federal legislation that really focused on ramping up literacy and reading coaching is that the programs in that area are far more diverse and developed than coaching models in math or science or other subject areas. And so the vast majority of the coaching models that we found that were content focused, you can kind of break down the coaching models in two buckets to start. One is the model focused on delivering coaching to teachers in a specific content area, or delivering coaching across grades and subjects in kind of a content agnostic way. Those are programs that may focus more on classroom management, general pedagogical practices, developing students' social emotional skills and mindsets. We found a subset of those, but the majority were content focused. And of those, nearly all were focused on literacy and reading coaching, and primarily in the early childhood and elementary school years. And so what we found is largely driven by this kind of subgroup of studies that focuses on reading in those early years.
So what did you find?
Well, what we found is that on average, the impacts on student achievement pooled across all subjects, but primarily driven by improvements in reading and English language arts. We found effect sizes on the order of about a tenth of a standard deviation, 0.11 standard deviations. And that doesn't sound like a large number, but when you think of that relative to the other types of known interventions in kind of that are available to education policymakers, that's actually quite a sizable improvement. You can think about that as actually, approximately being between 3 and 5 months of learning for a student, depending on what grade level they're at. And so, this is, I think, encouraging, but we also found some other things that kind of raise questions about what happens next for coaching. Regardless of the building blocks that you pick, that the enactment of that coaching has to be high quality in order for it to be efficacious. And so, I think it caused me to pause and say, well, there's a lot of open-ended questions that remain to be answered, but I don't see strong evidence that says, you have to have coaching for, 20 sustained hours, and anything below that definitively won't work.
Right. So in other words, it's important to have breakfast in the morning, but whether you have Cheerios or Wheaties may be less crucial.
I think that's well put, although I'm a Special K man.
Okay, got it. So I'm also curious about, given all the work that you've done and all the investigations around coaching, what advice you would give to state or district or even principals who wanted to really invest more in coaching as a capacity building model?
Well, the first thing to be upfront about is that at least now, most coaching models are not cheap. This is not a low cost kind of small nudge intervention. This is deciding as a district to make substantial investments in professional development by essentially investing in harnessing the expertise of a set of expert instructors, and then carving out time for those instructors to work with teachers. And that's costly. And so I think the question is, for researchers, how can we potentially continue to design programs that have important effects, but do that in a way that is more cost effective? There may be limits to that if ultimately the core driving factor of coaching is time between two individuals who have to earn salaries sitting in a room and engaging about instruction in a way that's not about being in a classroom and teaching kids. It's taking time away from that in some degree. So I would say that you can't do this lightly. You have to kind of invest in it as a kind of a mission priority and goal. But in doing so, the evidence suggests that is likely to be a worthwhile investment.
That set of things really gave a really rich picture of all the implications and all the things to think about for somebody who really wanted to go down this road. But your studies have suggested that this can be a fruitful road to go down. So Matt, I really appreciate the time that you've took on coaching us about coaching.